Hey everybody, how would you like to meet Jared Diamond? And I mean not just meet him, but hang out with him every day for almost 2 weeks. Here's how you can do it. As you know, the Skeptic Society helps to organize geo tours and trips around the world to various interesting places, each trip of which has a special guest lecturer. The next one coming up is September 23rd to October 10th. Iceland, Greenland, and Nova Scotia on a cruise ship. Every day you can hang out with Jared Diamond as he'll be lecturing on all these different places, as well as on his various interests in these areas. And you can just hang out with him at meals and during the excursions. And I have to tell you, I've known Jared a long time, and I cherish every time I get to hang out with him for a couple hours. Here you can do it for almost 2 weeks. It's a great deal. Go to skeptic.com and click on our Geo Tour page. September 23rd, October 10th, this year, 2024, on this Arctic excursion, Iceland, Greenland, and Nova Scotia, with the great Jared Diamond. Check it out.
Why should there be the Singularity? How do you know there won't be multiple ones, and how do you know we haven't already had one? I mean, so this is a point Terry Sejnowski made when I recorded an episode with him. He's got a book coming out on ChatGPT,
Cool.
and he doesn't even like the idea of the Singularity as a phrase that something like this, smartphone I'm holding up here. 50 years ago, this would have, if you said you had this would be, well, that's the Singularity. I mean, it's so massively different. It's such a massive change in society and life that it's happened. So maybe the Singularity is already here.
I mean, I'm not I'm not that interested in the concept of singularity per se. I mean, that's not what got me interested in all this anyway. What got so I started my interest in these topics through science fiction, including the original Star Trek. Yeah, but then in the early 70s, I encountered a book in our town library in southern New Jersey called The Prometheus Project, which was written by the Princeton physicist Gerald Feinberg. It was published in '68. And what it said was within a few decades, we'll probably get machines smarter than people. We'll be able to do nanoengineering at the molecular level, and we'll be able to conquer death and disease. The question will be, what do we use this for? Do we use it to expand consciousness, or do we use it just for extending mindless, rampant consumerism? He thought we should put this to a democratic vote, and he proposed that the UN should survey the world population to see whether these obviously impending technologies were put toward consciousness expansion or rampant consumerism. So I read that when I was maybe 7 years old in the early 70s, and that I tried to interest my dad in it. It was a little too far out from him, but it was from a physicist at Princeton, right? So in Feinberg's view, there was no need to posit a single moment of singularity. He was just saying, like, machines are going to get smarter than people, then we'll be able to build any physical object we want within reason, and we won't have to die anymore. And this is really interesting. And to me, indeed, these are the really interesting parts. Now, the notion of the singularity or the intelligence explosion, a related notion put forth by I.J. Good in 1965, that's the idea that at a certain point, the technological advances will come so rapidly that they appear instantaneous to the naive human observer. And I think the advent of superhuman AI, the conquest of death, and the conquest of scarcity by molecular manufacturing, these would be interesting even if the advent were a little more gradual, right? Like even if they came a little more slowly, and they were what transhumanist philosopher Max Moore calls a surge rather than a singularity. I mean, that's still quite radical. Now, it is an interesting observation that you can extrapolate Moore's law and other such exponential growth curves, and you can see, okay, the rate of progress in so many different fields is getting faster and faster, so that if you extrapolated it by curve fitting, the slope looks like it'll become infinite. So that is, it's a real observation. It's not the most interesting thing. It's an interesting thing. If we look at the singularity that way, I would say we're not there yet. Like the advent of a folding phone, it took years. It didn't take seconds, right? So, I mean, I would say now the meaningful new tech innovations, they come very fast, but they don't come like multiple Nobel Prize winning discoveries made each second, or some new kind of machine you never imagined is online every hour or something, right? So, I mean, by the definition of Kurzweil's singularity, I think we're not quite there yet, but you could argue, like, on a historical scale, maybe we're so close, our our robot descendants will consider that we were in the early singularity phase or something, right? I mean, there's always a difference how things feel from the inside versus how they look from the outside. Because, of course, on the time scale of the evolution of all of humanity, if we really got a human level AGI 5, even 50 or 100 years from now, I mean, that's incredibly close relative to the past or history of humanity or the future post-human history of sentient beings, right? So, like, in that grand sense, maybe we are like almost in the middle of it. But of course, 5 or 50 years or whatever still feels like a long time to us. But that's, how different is that from the fact that the 3-hour security line at the airport feels like a really long time while you're in it,
Yeah.
even though in the cosmic sense it's just a blip, right?
Well, it could just be a time scale thing, and also, if you have enough quantitative change and a gap between when you look at it, it feels qualitatively different. So, I like Kevin Kelly's idea of protopia. Just make tomorrow slightly better than today. Just 1%. Every year 1% for a century, and all of a sudden, it's 100% increase in whatever it is you're measuring. And at the right scale, that feels qualitatively different. And
Sure.
so maybe that's all it is. But on the
Well,
other
the
hand,
human brain,
I think
human brain is not changing its processing speed that much, right? Whereas technology is advancing more, and I mean that certainly is real. Like, let alone going back to the Stone Age, where things remain almost the same your whole life. I mean, even certainly the amount of change I've seen in the last 5 years is more than I saw between like 80 and 85, even though that was the PC revolution and so on.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I make the point in my essay on that, that where's our flying cars from the 1950s idea? Well, but cars are, incrementally better. I mean, my first car was a 66 Ford Mustang, and the car I have now, I have a Tesla Model S. It's just way, way better. Even though it doesn't fly, but I mean, it's just so superior.
It speeds up very fast. Yeah.
Well, the accelerating curve is very good on that. But even my other car that my wife drives, a Ford Explorer, it has most of the bells and whistles that my Tesla Model S has now. I mean, they're all doing it. GM, Ford, BMW, Porsche, they're all incorporating all these little things that make the car so much safer and more comfortable and better and so on. That's what I mean. I guess a qualitative difference might be true self-driving, where the Uber comes to my office and there's no driver at all.
Well, right. But one thing that's interesting with that is being a skeptic on true self-driving now means saying, well, no, Elon, that's going to be 10 more years. It's not coming next year. But you have to remember, 20 years ago, being a skeptic on full self-driving meant it will never happen because computers can never do that. And quite few people are saying that now. They're just saying, well, no, it's 10 years out. It could be 15 years out. So it's not worth taking into account from an investment standpoint. But I think people have understood that that's going to be a solvable problem. Like, the Tesla full self-driving is not quite good enough, but it's far enough along that people can see where things are going. And that goes back to the beginning of this conversation. Like, 20 years ago, you sort of had to be a visionary to think full self-driving was coming within our lifetimes. But now almost everybody thinks that. It's just, do you agree with Elon that it's a couple years off? Or do you think it could be a couple decades off? But it's the outlier to think that's an impossible problem that will never be solved, right? And that's it's a huge attitudinal shift, and so it's also a huge shift in the psychological makeup of what it takes to think the singularity could happen. It's not, you don't have to be so adventurous anymore.
Yeah. Since you brought that up, electric cars themselves, have been around for over a century, but it's all the way up until like the 1990s. There were pretty much skeptics everywhere that this will ever come about as a viable market. And
sure, just like people are with hydrogen cars now,
right? Yeah. To the extent that you study how technologies change, could you attribute that to one person? I mean, Elon just said, we're going to do this, and I'm going to just pour my money into it and just keep losing money until it happens and we have the infrastructure,
he
and we're
certainly
here.
Accelerated it.
Yeah.
He accelerated it. What you can't say is, did he accelerate it by 3 years, 5 years, or 20 years? It's very hard to say because you don't know what the Chinese government would have done otherwise or what other weird guy might have popped up, right? And I mean, I think that with my own AGI work. So suppose my work with the OpenCog Hyperpunk system, which is my own main AGI project, which is not an LLM. It puts together neural nets like LLMs with logical reasoning systems, with evolutionary learning systems. So we're integrating a bunch of different AI methods. So suppose that really works and gives a human level thinking machine within 3 or 5 years from now, which is what we're pushing toward. I mean, then I would like to think I've made a big difference, right? I mean, I have an ego like everybody else. On the other hand, how big a difference is it really? Like if I hadn't come up with that, could have been 2 years more before someone else came up with something similar. Could have been 6 months because the nature of many things could have been 15 years, right? I mean, I think all of these technologies in the end are implicit in the whole technological culture around the earth. But that's not to say that an individual can't make a difference. Like, I mean, what if Donald Trump had never been born? How would the political would the political sphere be different now if that one human being weren't there?
All of history is contingent that way. But what I mean about the Elon example is that all the way up until I don't know the late '90s, there were lots of conspiracy theories. It's one of the things I study about the automobile industry and the oil industry and so on are squashing these technologies that'll give us essentially free energy and electric cars and great batteries and so on. And that's the only reason we don't have that now. And then all of a sudden Elon comes along and it's like, oh, okay. I guess it is possible. Or, that GM and Ford, kept it away because they're in cahoots.
Elon, the thing is, if you look at that, Elon didn't invent it. Like Tesla existed before Elon Musk came in. And if Elon hadn't come in with his own particular brand of business savvy, then that might never have gotten beyond the stage of really cool prototypes. We can't say, or maybe they would have sold to Ford, and the same thing would have happened just 5 years slower than Tesla.
I remember Bill Nye, the science guy, coming to my house in his he had the GM Leaf. Was that what it was called? The Leaf, like in the early '90s.
My sister has a Leaf. Yeah, they're still around.
And he drove from his. He drove from his house was like 30 miles away. He had to plug into my socket just to get home. They don't speed up
and it was. They don't accelerate
and it's an ugly car, and it's not fun to drive. Yeah. There was something about what Elon did. It's like, okay, this is a cool car. I want this car. It'd be a fun car to have, and it's electric. In other words, it's more of a market function rather than a technology.
Well, sure. That's like Jobs with the iPhone, right? Yeah. I mean, the iPhone. It both was highly functional and it looked really cool and shiny, and that certainly helps with people and with bringing funding in to foster further development. And I mean, on the whole, I'd rather see new technologies developed in the interest of people's love of shiny objects and in the interest of killing people or spying on people.
Sure.
The other things that have driven AI technology development. So that's another thing I touch on in my book, The Consciousness Explosion. I mean, I think we are on the verge of machines much smarter than people, and these will both manifest new kinds of consciousness and twoink human consciousness into new states that hasn't been in before. On the other hand, I don't think there's a guarantee that those will go in an amazingly utopic direction, nor do I think there's necessarily a high probability it goes in a terrifyingly bad direction. No, we don't even know how much we can influence the direction. I prefer to adopt as a working hypothesis that we can influence it in a positive direction. Because, I mean, as far as I can see, the odds that working to make AGI compassionate, democratic, and beneficial backfire and increase the odds of making nasty, malevolent AI. Like I don't see why that would happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, either trying to make it good will help make it good, or it just won't make a big difference because there's sort of inexorable processes at work that we can't grok, right? And
Can't grok. Yes, that's right. All right, let's talk about intelligence, natural intelligence versus artificial intelligence, or in intelligence studies. There's G, general intelligence. Some people have a lot more of that than others. Then you have the subscales on the IQ test that measure different specific kinds of intelligence. And then how you apply that to artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, the G factor in psychology is not even really well established cross-culturally, right? So I mean, if you apply that to people from a Stone Age tribe in the Amazon or something, it doesn't work. We don't have a foundation for it. People there can be very gifted at things important in their culture, and we can't measure it, right? So I don't think the G factor in itself applied to AI systems is necessarily very, very useful. Certainly, IQ tests aren't. Like, clearly with LLMs, we could see you could fine tune the model on IQ tests. It's not even going to impress anyone too much anymore if it can answer all the questions. So I think the notion of intelligence is a bit of an intellectual puzzle, in the sense that our notions of intelligence are very fit to human beings, which makes sense. But on the other hand, you're making a non-human system, you have to think about it somehow. And mathematically, you can come up with very general notions of general intelligence, like, the ability to optimize computable reward functions in computable environments. It's basically the ability to solve arbitrary problems. But humans are very bad at that, right? And like, we can't even run a maze in 8,000 dimensions, let alone solve an arbitrary math problem. And arguably, the physical universe doesn't even let you do that, right? Because only, of all possible math problems, only some could even be expressed within the size of the physical universe as we currently understand. So at the low end, sort of, you've got measures of intelligence tied to humans. At the high end, you have mathematical measures of intelligence that are beyond what even makes sense to hold a physical system to. So then, how do we really want to think about intelligence? I mean, you can look at notions like, okay, can this system generalize beyond its experience and its training data? Like, can it take a leap into the unknown beyond what it was trained and programmed to do? You can formalize that to some extent, but there's a lot of wiggle room there in how you weight different kinds of creative leaps, right? And that's you could view that as a problem or not, because you could also take a very pragmatic view. You could say, once you have an AI that could do every human job in the economy and can, create Nobel Prize winning science discoveries and corresponding inventions minute by minute. I mean, I don't care if I have a test to measure. Like, I can see that this is an amazing revolutionary thing. And I mean, at a lower level than that, like, if you had a robot that could go to MIT, go to class with everybody, take the same exams, do the same group problem sets, get a PhD in every subject. I mean, okay, I'm willing to accept that's a very, very interesting and intelligent system, right? So I don't know that we need a precise definition. I think we have a decent working understanding. And as an analogy, I'd note biologists don't have a precise definition of life. It doesn't matter. Like synthetic biology goes on, medicine goes on, then you could debate whether a retrovirus is really alive or not, but that's boring to biologists, really. So I think systems like ChatGPT certainly have challenged some understandings of general intelligence, but I think the world is sort of understanding what these things are by now. Like they're systems with a very, very broad scope of knowledge relative to an individual human because they're trained on the whole web, but yet they do not generalize that well beyond the knowledge that's fed into them. Now, they don't have to for some purposes because so much knowledge was fed into them, but it's quite different than a person. Like each of us has way less knowledge fed in than ChatGPT did, but we can leap beyond our knowledge much better than ChatGPT can, right? And this is the challenge of AGI R&D, is making systems that can leap beyond their knowledge in a manner that's nevertheless conditioned by their experience, right? And then keep doing that over and over again. You make a leap, you make a hypothesis, you test it out, you make another leap, and
Yeah.
that's not yet achieved. On the other hand, to many of us in the field, it seems like it is quite close at hand now. And of course, until it's there, people can say, well, no, we don't believe it. And that's fine. I mean, at this point, it doesn't matter to most of us in the field because it's not like 20 years ago when it was impossible to get funding to work on AGI research. There's enough belief that it may come soon. You can now get paid to work on it and to build a team working on it. And I think that's good enough that progress can move forward.
Yeah. You're
quite a bit.
probably familiar with the Flynn effect, James Flynn's discovery that IQ scores are going up about 3 points every 10 years for the past century or so. That appears to be flattening out now. But it's not on any of the portions of the IQ test, just the abstract reasoning. And here, I think this idea of intelligence is that you can abstractly reason about something you've never seen before based on what you have seen that's sort of similar. You know, these types of questions. This is to this as that is to, and then you have to pick amongst the options, or you have
right. But those kinds of questions, LLM does very well at, actually. So that kind of example, right? So you're actually you're abstracting at a higher level of abstraction than that. But it's in computer music, which I've experimented with a lot, just due to being a spare time musician. You can see what the boundary is. Like current AI music models can come up with like a 12-bar blues song quite beautifully. I mean, they're not Robert Johnson or Jimi Hendrix or something, but I mean, as well as the average Vegas lounge band, or maybe better, right? But they're not inventing like a new genre of music, right? So I think if you took an LLM or a similar music model and trained it on music up to the year 1900, it will never invent neoclassical metal or progressive jazz, right? If you ask it to put West African music and Western classical music together, it would like literally put Mozart to a West African beat or something, but it's not going to make up Duke Ellington and Thelonious Monk, right? So you can see there's a way human creativity, it does mix up what came before. So it's not coming up with something totally original by divine inspiration out of nothing, right? It mixes up what came before, but it does so introducing more fundamental novelty and imagination than what current neural nets can come up with. And this is partly because there is a self there, right? I mean, human beings, we have a body, we have a model of ourselves, we have a model of others in the world we're interacting with, and we're using this to ground our leaps and extrapolations. And it seems like without some notion of self and other and the relation between the self and the world, I don't see how a system can systematically generalize in a human-like way. There might be some other way different than how humans do it, but so this is what has interested me in robotics, and I've been working with David Hanson on Sophia robot, then the Desdemona robot who sings in the band I'm playing in Desdemona's Dream, and then virtual characters in 3D game worlds also. Not that I think embodiment is the only way to get to general intelligence. There may be many, many other ways, but if you want to follow a human-like path to radical generalization, it seems we're making these abstractions in a way that's grounded in our own like embodied life experience. So that's sort of the most straightforward path to take, is take your cognitive architecture, embed it in some embodied system, which is interacting with other embodied systems in some shared world. And we can just experiment with that so much more easily than we could 20, 30, 40 years ago. I mean, building robots is easier. Game worlds are there. I mean, as well as having supercomputers to run your AI systems on.
Yeah. Well, maybe human intelligence, however it's defined, is just its own unique kind. Other animals are intelligent, but in different ways, like crows dropping pebbles into a thing of water to
Certainly
raise
true.
the level and so on. Maybe it's just a form of problem solving and it's species dependent. And so your idea of an AGI is its own species. It's just going to be something different entirely.
AGIs will be many, many different species, right? There can be more probably much more diversity among AGIs than we see among biological or organisms, even because because they're engineered, they're not just evolved. I mean, just like in a way, there's more diversity among human engineered flying machines than among natural flying machines. Now, like you got blimps, you got rockets, you have helicopters, you have a lot of different forms, and I think intelligence will be like that. Yeah, a lot of different forms.
Interesting. All right, what about consciousness, sentience, and so on? How do you think about that with AGI?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we don't have a solid scientific theory of consciousness, really, or a framework for even addressing it. And this is very, very interesting to me. Actually, it comes up in my own life in a topic we probably shouldn't get into, but I've been interested in parapsychology for some time.
Why not? Let's get into it. Why not?
Yeah. Well,
yeah, I'm a skeptic.
You're a skeptic.
Well, but altered
as a
states.
skeptic.
Let's just talk about altered states of consciousness. Forget the paranormal or whatever. Those are just words.
What I wanted to mention there is, so I know a lot of people who are parapsychology researchers in the lab, and it's about 50-50 between people who are like, don't talk to me about consciousness. We're just gathering data. This is a physics phenomenon that just isn't well understood yet. We just need to do the data to figure out how the physics intersects the neurobiology, right? And then the other half are like, the fundamental ground of the universe is consciousness, and parapsychology is a manifestation of that. And if you try to think about it as just some weird physics we don't understand yet, you're not going to be able to understand it, right? And the thing is, because there's no solid science of consciousness, it's impossible to mediate that type of argument, right? And I think it's the same way with AI. You have some people who think, obviously, if a robot says it's conscious and acts like it's conscious and is cognizant of what's happening around it, why the hell shouldn't I say it's conscious? Like I can't feel your experience either as another human being. But there are other people who are just like, well, it's completely obvious that this is a simulation of consciousness and it's not really alive, right? And I don't buy that. I think that's wrong. But I have to say, we don't have as good a science of that as I would like. So I think that will be addressed by brain and brain computer interfacing during the coming decades, though. So like, I think if I could wire my brain into your brain, not necessarily yours personally, though that would be fun, but any other human's brain, and increase or decrease the bandwidth of the connection, presumably I would feel your consciousness at the other end, almost the way that like two conjoined twins can feel each other's consciousness,
like
or
Spock's
something,
mind
right?
meld.
Yeah, exactly. But then, okay, then what happens when you fuse your consciousness with that of Desdemona the robot, or say that of an AI, like living in your phone, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, then it seems like you could develop a sort of second person science or something which would cut beyond the issues that we're having now, because now basically you have your first person experience. There's a sense in which I do think I'm self-aware, right? And then you have third person evaluations of others' consciousness, where I'm like, Michael says he's conscious, so, and he looks a lot like me, probably he is, right? So maybe second person interaction, media by brain computer interfacing, would help. Like, what does it feel like to wire your brain into that of a dog or a mouse, or a kettle of boiling water, right? I mean, it's a lot of unknowns. So I tend to be panpsychist in orientation. Like, my gut feel is like everything is conscious in some way, but some things are more conscious than others. But then if we try to pin that down, you know, we don't know exactly what that means. David Chalmers, who coined the term the hard problem of consciousness, who I know a bit, he would say, no, everything is proto-conscious, and only some things manifest that proto-consciousness into full-blown consciousness. And by the time you get to that level, I mean, you would like to have an actual science of it, right?
Yeah.
Because these are quite fine distinctions. So from an AGI view, I just feel like, let's build the machines that appear to be highly generally intelligent and that act like they're conscious. We can certainly concurrently advance the science of consciousness. I'll be quite surprised if it turns out we made super AIs that are philosophical zombies and have no conscious experience. It would be interesting. I mean, if it happens, it happens. And maybe you need to add the magic Roger Penrose, like, quantum gravity doohickey to the AI's brain. Then it suddenly wakes up and says, now I can feel something. I can't assign that a probability of 0, though it doesn't seem
Well, but
super
on the other hand,
likely.
that's sort of how it has to happen. You just keep scaling up the complexity, and at some point, I wouldn't say the light comes on like a switch, but like a rheostat, and it gets less dim and less dim, brighter, whatever. Like, so you're the inventor of Sophia the robot. Okay, so when I've seen her, it's like, yeah, it's obviously a robot. But if you had an actress playing Sophia, and then acted more like Data on Star Trek, who's an actor, then I would then cross the uncanny valley and go, that is a sentient person, right?
What's been interesting is, so you can have a human actor puppeteer Sophia,
right?
Using motion capture, and she does seem far more lifelike that way.
Yeah.
Than if you're using existing control software. But then, we're working on training neural models on the data from humans puppeteering the robots. So in a couple years, the robot may be able to move that fluidly just by training models on the way the human moves when they puppeteer the robot. So these all these lines are getting blurrier and blurrier, which is really quite interesting. Yeah, and I've had a very funny incident where a relative of my wife who was from a rural village in China and had very little exposure to technology was in our lab in Hong Kong, and I mean, this relative had never seen robots or anything before, right? And so we showed her Sophia, but disassembled. Then one of our software developers who spoke fluent Chinese showed this relative of my wife who spoke only Chinese around the office. And so he was explaining the way the robots work and how the technology worked. And then after my wife's relative left the office, later she said to my wife in Chinese, wow, that robot was incredible. Like it walked so much like a person. It talked perfect Chinese and explained to me exactly how the partially developed prototype worked. So my wife's relative thought our human programmer was a robot.
Oh, that's funny.
It was great. And if you knew the guy,
That's a great example.
He's a little bit stiff in the way he moves,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
he kind of talks in a very methodical way. Like he's more robot-like than some people are. So, but that it all depends on your mindset. Like she was in a robot lab
Right.
and didn't know much about technology, so she naturally expected it would be a robot that we apportioned to give her a tour of the lab, right? So.
Well, my solution to the problem of other minds is that I apply the Copernican principle to myself, that I'm not special. My brain is wired up like yours. I have these inner feelings. You probably do too. It would be irrational of me to think I'm the only one on the earth that's sentient and everybody else is a zombie. Okay.
Yeah.
But if it's a robot, I know I'm not a robot. So in a way, I guess. So
yeah. Did you ever read Breakfast of Champions by Kurt Vonnegut?
I know the book. I haven't read it, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I read that when I was a little kid.
Yeah.
Like Kilgore Trout, the fictional
right.
SF author, he writes a pamphlet which says, "You who are reading this book is the only conscious being on the planet. Everyone else
Right.
appears to be conscious, but they are merely automata put here to amuse or annoy you."
Right. But
I mean, in the book, then a crazy guy reads that and goes and starts killing some of the automata, of course, because that's what makes
right.
that's what makes an entertaining literature. But yeah, these ideas and puzzles have been around.
Well, so here's
around
another.
some
I just had Christoph Koch on the podcast. He has a new book out about consciousness. He famously lost his bet with David Chalmers that in 25 years the hard problem will be solved. And he admits not solved. And I queued up the Wikipedia page on hard problem of consciousness, and there's like a dozen different theories. Why is there a dozen different theories? I mean, there's not like a dozen different theories for the origins of the universe. The Big Bang won out over all the other competitors, and now that's how science normally goes. You get a lot of competition for a while, and then, although he pointed out that if you look up interpretations of quantum physics, there's like a dozen different interpretations. Like, okay, fair enough. Maybe some problems are just conceived in a way that there's not going to be a consensus for one explanation.
No, I think both of those problems will be solved, both the quantum measurement problem and the so-called hard problem of consciousness.
You do?
We're very impatient in that.
You think it's just
era,
a hard
right?
problem, not an insoluble one?
Well, the way we may need to reframe the problem to some extent, just like how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, to use the famous example, was not solved exactly, but it was kind of obsoleted, right? I mean, you could say what is the nature of time is not solved either. We just don't worry about it much, right? But if you read a book on the philosophy of time, it's at least as confusing as a philosophy of consciousness. And like, what's the nature of time in quantum mechanics and general relativity? How does it relate to the flow of time that we experience? I mean, time and space are at least as confusing as consciousness, but we understand them well enough for the purposes that we have, so we don't really worry about it much, right?
Who was it that said? Was it Feynman? Somebody said, "Shut up and calculate. Don't worry about the metaphysics behind it."
Well, I think the metaphysics. Yeah, you decide you're satisfied with that when you feel like you're satisfied with it, right? It's not that rigorous. It's more conditional on your overall mindset. My gut feel, as I said, is neuroscience, brain-computer interfacing, brain-brain interfacing. I think these things will give us a different understanding qualitative and scientific for what consciousness is, which will make the hard problem not seem like such a hard problem anymore. But think about, Hume's problem of induction, like just because the sun has risen in the morning
Mm-hmm.
every day for the last 500 days, how do we really know it will rise again tomorrow? I mean, in a sense, many foundational things like this are philosophically unsolved, but we're not harping on them,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah. Let me
but
just.
we have Bayesian probability theory. We have stuff that works, but I mean, it doesn't solve the foundational problem. And so, I think that's what will happen with the hard problem of consciousness as we get hacked brains and superhuman AIs and all this. The practical problem of consciousness will be solved well enough
Well, you
that we
hinted at
don't
one
fuss on the
possible solution to
metaphysics.
the, what's it like to be a bat? The definition of consciousness is of what it's like to be something. Okay. Well, I can't know what it's like to be a bat. For that matter, I can't know what it's like to be you. And the idea that I can is a kind of a Cartesian dualism that my little homunculus tiptoes
Yeah,
over into your brain to see if the red looks the same as it does to you. That's impossible. But if you suggested wiring up our brains together, could I actually see what your red looks like?
in a way. But I mean, if you want, I think you could pragmatically. But if you want to be a philosopher, you could always say you only know what my red looks like when I'm hooked up to your
I
brain.
see. Okay.
Maybe it looks
Right.
maybe it looks differently when I'm not hooked up to your brain, right? I mean, how can we know that?
Okay. All right.
That's
Right.
like, how do I know this is brown instead of green, meaning brown until 2027 and then green after that, right?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that's what I mean. You can get to a pragmatic level of understanding where it seems not worth arguing about anymore. But by the nature of philosophy, you can never really resolve anything. That's part of the fun of it. And I mean, these philosophy conundrums can be stimulating, even though by their nature you can't
Yeah.
ever really fully resolve them. Huh?
Well, on the paranormal, I'm fond of saying there's no such thing as the paranormal or the supernatural for that matter. There's just the normal and natural and stuff we can't explain yet. And these are words we use as just linguistic placeholders, like when cosmologists talk about dark energy and dark matter. They don't mean those as
Sure.
explanations. They're just saying, look, we're calling it that for now until we figure out what it is. So let's just say, for example, there is a way for people to read each other's minds or something like that. And it turns out that it has to do with, Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff's theory of these microtubules inside neurons in which the collapse of the wave function happens in such a way that you get a synchronicity between neurons and this crosses the space through the quantum field and I can read your minds. If that was true, I don't happen to think it is, but if it was, that wouldn't be paranormal anymore. It wouldn't be ESP. It would just
Sure.
be some part of quantum consciousness or something like that, a part of
Well,
science.
it might be outside normal everyday human experience, but it's not outside the comprehensible universe.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to get philosophical though, it could be that there's the understandable physical universe, and then there are things of like infinite algorithmic information that will always just appear spooky and random to us, right?
Mm.
I mean, the world could be that way. I kind of hope it isn't because I like to understand things, right? But there's certainly it doesn't appear to be that way. The world isn't quite that wacky, right? So, and I mean, I think most parapsychologists are trying to find some systematic theory of how these things happen. Like if you just believe these things are pure and simple anomalies happening for reasons utterly beyond comprehension, you're not going to do scientific parapsychology. You're just going to say, wow, cool, I can't understand the world,
Yeah.
right? Which is, if you look at it from a math perspective, is entirely possible, right? Because, I mean, the world could be not a Turing machine. The world could be like a hypercomputer with an infinite complexity beyond what the human brain can understand. And then if you map out what the world would look like in that case, yes, all manner of random things with no pattern would keep occurring, right? And I mean, there's no guarantee the world is orderly, right? In a sense, it feels miraculous. The world is so orderly as it is. This was what the quantum physicist Eugene Wigner called the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics, right? Like, why is it that relatively simple math models keep seeming to explain what happens in the universe? I mean, of course, we came out of this universe, then we invented this math conditioned on our experience, but it seems like it wouldn't have to be that way. Like, why aren't the laws of physics 407 order differential equations instead of all second order differential equations, right? So there's a remarkable comprehensibility to a lot of the world, and maybe that holds for these ESP remote viewing type phenomena. I mean, or maybe it doesn't. So far, the simple phenomenon hasn't been found. Yeah, one amusing idea I had is once you have universal surveillance, so like once the government has a panopticon and cameras everywhere on the world, then we should be able to evaluate things like ESP and precognition pretty well, because we'll be seeing everything everyone says, right? And so then if an identical twin senses their twin was about to get hurt beforehand, the NSA's and CCP's cameras will catch all that, right? So if a poltergeist appears in someone's house, it should be on the surveillance camera, right? So maybe
exactly.
the world's intelligence agencies will crack the problem of the so-called paranormal first.
This is how we apply to UAPs too. How come, with billions of high-resolution cameras, we only get these blurry videos, unless the UAPs just happen to be blurry by nature?
Well, yeah.
Out of focus, like Bigfoot. Okay.
But with that point of view, though, a superhuman AGI with cameras everywhere, what aspects of the world that we don't know might it be able to detect? And that's a broader question, right? It may have no overlap with what we call paranormal phenomena, but it might detect many things that we're not now imagining. Just as, I mean, how many aspects of the world, as we think about it now, were not imagined 500 years ago? I mean, quite a lot. So what currently inconceivable aspects of the world might something even 5 times as generally intelligent as us come up with, let alone like a super intelligence 1,000 times more generally intelligent, whatever these factors mean. And yeah, that just goes back to the fundamental uncertainty that will be there if we really do get something significantly more generally intelligent than humans. Like if you put a pure rationalist hat on, you just have to say, after you get to that point, extrapolation based on past history is not that helpful. I mean, that relates to one of my disagreements with my friend Ray. Is he hypothesizes human level AGI by 2029, then a singularity by 2045. So I'm like, what is happening in these 16 years? To my mind, once you have an AGI really at the level of a smart human scientist, why will it take 16 years to get to something massively, massively beyond human intelligence? I think only if the AGI itself wants to slow down its development out of its own aesthetics or sense of safety. Because I think once you have one human level AGI, it's not a huge engineering problem, maybe to make 100 human level AGIs. These human level AGIs are designing new chips. I mean, they're creating new AI programming languages. They're self-improving. It feels to me like some small integer number of years between human level AGI and dramatically superhuman AGI. Ray proposes 16 years based on his curve fitting. I would argue that curve fitting is all in the human era. And after you have a human level AGI, I mean, maybe the exponent changes in the exponential curve fit. But this little disagreement between Ray and I, who mostly agree on everything, I mean, that indicates that you really have a lot of uncertainty in this area.
What about do you know Stein's law? Things that can't go on forever won't. those
No.
exponential curves, they can't just keep going.
Well, the idea Ray has, which seems borne out so far, is these exponential curves are made of a series of cascading S curves. So, and that's how Moore's law has worked, right? Like each individual technology has had an S curve, or went slowly, went fast, and even out. Then another technology came on top of it, right? But we don't need this to go on forever for the singularity, as Ray and I conceive it to happen. We just need it to go on 5 or 10 more years, really, right? I mean, so whether or not it's true that it won't go on forever, the question is whether it goes long enough to make machines equal or slightly exceed human brain power, right? And if it goes that far, then I think you're in a different era of significant uncertainty. And, Stein, Moore, and Murphy and all the rest were extrapolating on, they're extrapolating on human experience, which is of non-zero but limited relevance in a post-human era.
Okay, a couple more questions on consciousness. Now, first of all, I can imagine what it's like to be you or a bat or a dolphin. I can theory of mind into my dog. When I spend a lot of time with him, I have a sense of what it's like to be him. What would it mean for me to, like, I have a sense of what it's like to be a watch or a water bottle of iced coffee? This panpsychism stuff, don't you need a nervous system of some kind to be sentient and conscious?
I don't know, because if you look at quantum mechanics, I mean, every wave packet is in a way sensing and acting. I mean, it's receiving information from the environment, and it is having a causal effect on the environment, even at the quark or gluon level. So where do you draw the line and say that's not perception and action? I mean, why does it have to be electricity along a nerve fiber rather than, say, strong nuclear force or weak nuclear force? I mean, it's very hard to draw the line. I mean, there's a book you might have seen by the British philosopher Galen Strawson. He's an analytical philosopher. It's called, I think, Physicalism Entails Panpsychism. And what he's arguing in a very dry analytical philosophy way is, if you want to hold everything as physical, which is a view you've said something analogous to in this conversation, if you want to hold everything as physical, he tries to argue logically that must imply that everything is conscious. So he tries to take the notion that there's a dividing line between those physical systems that are conscious and not, and just show that that's an incoherent notion. Now, I'm not a hardcore physicalist in the way that Strawson is, but I think his argument is pretty much sound. Like that, there is no logically coherent articulation of the idea that this thing is conscious and this thing isn't conscious, because this thing only knows this thing by its perceptions. And when you go down to the particle level, it just becomes very hard to define the dividing line. So panpsychism says, well, just don't bother. Say, yeah, that photon has its own little quantum of experience, but it doesn't necessarily have the same states of consciousness as a human being has, right? I mean, of course, we self-reflect and have all sorts of kinds of experience that a particle doesn't have. But then, we run here into the fact that there's not an agreed definition on what is consciousness, that a particle or a keychain or a brain might have it even, right? And this is the difficulty with philosophy versus a lot of things in science. So, I mean, in science, you can have a definite hypothesis. You can argue if it's true or not against a certain data set.
Well, let me hold up a page of your book here.
Yeah.
So you have this page of these different states of consciousness here. Of course, that requires a brain and neurons, but that's just maybe a human level way of talking about altered states of consciousness and so on. locked-in syndrome, REM sleep, light sleep, slow-wave sleep, generalized seizures, vegetative state, and so on. How would you apply something like that to anything else and still talk about consciousness?
Well, it's interesting. Very early in my experimentation with AI systems, I found the default state of the AI systems I was working with then in the late 90s was either what I thought of as completely stoned or obsessive compulsive. Like it was easy to tune the system to just flit from one thought to the next, to the next, to the next, with only a loose thread of coherence. It was easy to tune the system to narrow focus and just keep thinking about the same exact area over and over again. What was harder was to get it to meaningfully task switch like people do in their good moments anyway, where you'll think about one topic in a coherent way, pulling in other stuff from your background knowledge, but not totally losing the thread until you decide that has run its course, and then you do pick a different thread to follow, right? So I think you can pretty easily see the analog of different human states of consciousness in AI systems like the OpenCog Hyperion system that I'm working with. And that's really interesting from a pragmatic point of view. And you can do more creative things with an AI system because an AI system can copy its brain lobes freely. So you could take a mind lobe of the system, copy it, let the copy explore speculative trains of thought, while the main version sort of deduces stuff from its current state of knowledge in a more grounded way, right? So, I mean, you can look at analogs of human states of consciousness like that. What some philosophers might then say is, okay, but you're emulating the cognitive or neural correlates of conscious states rather than the conscious states themselves. And that then becomes the hard problem of consciousness again. That becomes vexing. But if you're not worried about the correlation between subjective experience and empirical structure and dynamics, right? I mean, then yeah, we can get the structures and the patterns and dynamics corresponding to different human-like states of consciousness
But
in an AI system. But what's interesting is the AI system can be way more flexible, and you can get dynamic states that are interesting for solving problems, but don't resemble any human state of consciousness either, which gets at why I think there will be an explosion of states of consciousness and varieties of conscious experience, right? So that's the consciousness explosion, right?
Right.
It's not just a bunch of new gadgets and fun
So you're saying it's
toys
not
to play with.
What's the term? It's substrate independent. Consciousness can be.
I mean, in a sense, but that has to be unpacked a little because the notion of substrate independence really is usually used to on a more fine-grained level. So like my feeling of being me would be the same if we made a detailed particle level simulation of me in a computer. So that's one question. Like if you simulated me down to the atomic or elementary particle level, then would that really be me? Would the experiences in that simulation to be the same as the experiences in my mind? So that's in Star Trek, it's like, was it still Kirk's experiences after he stepped out of the transporter, right? And I mean, I think yes. I'm open to no. I'd be intrigued by no, but it seems almost surely yes, right? But so that's the usual meaning of substrate independent. Like it's not about what atoms are in me right now. It's about the arrangement of the atoms. Now, there's another question whether an AI system that's loosely inspired by the human brain or mind can have states of consciousness that are loosely similar to those in the human brain and mind. And that's a somewhat different hypothesis. I suspect that's true also. Like I suspect if you take an OpenCog system whose dynamics are loosely like that of the human mind, I expect its experiences will be loosely like those of a human mind. But that, I mean, that could be false, even if my precise mind upload had the same experiences as me, right? So there's a lot to be discovered here.
Yeah.
If you look at LLMs, though, it's very clear the dynamics inside an LLM bear no resemblance to the dynamics inside a human brain, right? So whatever they're doing to give simulations of human-like intelligence and whatever unique experience they might be having, if it is like something to be an LLM, it's clearly not like being a human, right? Like they've got super different emergent structures and dynamics going on inside them.
All right, mind uploading. I guess it depends on what you mean by the self. When you say, I'm going to upload my mind and now I'm in the cloud, because there's two different definitions of self. There's the, your set of memories, your memory self, everything all the way up till right now of your life. That's you. And then there's the point of view self, the looking through your eyes, experiencing the self, the world from one moment to the next.
Mm-hmm.
So if I slid you into a sophisticated MRI scanner and scanned your connectome and digitized the file and put it in the cloud, and then slid you back out and said, well, Ben, you're now up there. You're in that file. You'd say, no, I'm not. I'm right here. I'm experiencing life. I'm still right here. That's just a copy. In other words, your point of view self doesn't go with the digital file. It's still in your head.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned the Xtropy email list from the 1990s. One of the rules that emerged on there in the mid-90s was discussions of whether your mind upload is really you were banned because it just went around in circles so many times through the same things again and again. It's not that there was a dogmatic, like theological line. It was just people just argued it back and forth. It was like there was nothing more to say on the topic.
Okay,
right? So
fair enough.
And I mean, the Star Trek transporter came up all the time too. Okay, Spock came out of there. He felt like he was Spock. He said he was Spock. But was it really Spock, or had they murdered Spock and then created a new simulacrum that was deluded it was Spock? So some people were like, I will never walk in that transporter. I'm not going to be killed. So some other conglomeration of atoms can impersonate me, even if it is insanely deluded that it's me. It's still not me, right? But then on the other hand, if all your friends are stepping in the transporter and stepping out on the beach in Tahiti and then stepping back the next morning, maybe eventually you'll do it anyway and set the philosophical worry aside, right? And so that I think if you get into the cognitive science of it, the self is a construct, and there's a beautiful book on this by the German philosopher and neuroscientist Thomas Metzinger, which is called Being No One. And it's a big, fat German philosophy / neuroscience, but I think it's even fatter than the consciousness explosion. And he goes over probably 100 different weird neurological dysfunctions, which have taught us something about how the human brain constructs what he would call the illusion of a self, or the phenomenal self. And it's pretty clear that the feeling of being a coherent self and the feeling that, like, I'm the same guy as I was a minute ago, let alone yesterday or when I was 2 years old, it's very clear now how the brain constructs this feeling. Now, just as with free will, which Metzinger talks about a bunch also, I mean, illusion isn't necessarily the quite right word, but it's clear with free will as well, like our sense that we are deciding this thing is not quite what we think it is, right? Like very often the decision is made in our unconscious brain, and then half a second after that, we have the conscious feeling that we ourselves decided it somehow, right? So the self is sort of like will. It's a very convenient construct. And given that the feeling of being the same self as you were a minute ago is a construct anyway, it's very hard to diss the self of Spock after he came out of the Transformer too badly, because it's a self is is a cognitive construct, both in the spot before the transporter and in the spot after the transporter, right? So it's I've thought about that in terms of mind expansion also. Like, if what if you could take a pill that released some nanobots into your brain to increase your intelligence by a factor of 1,000? I mean, if you did that in 1 minute, you're basically killing yourself, right? It's so, like, you'll have like some shock and awe feeling of contact with the absolute or whatever it is, right? And then you're gone, and some supermind is there.
I
So
mean, if my dog
it
found
feel
out he's mortal and he has a mortgage payment to make next month, he'd be like,
yeah,
"What?"
yeah. But it's more emotionally appealing to, let's say, you doubled your intelligence every month. You might think that's slow enough that you could enjoy and appreciate
Yeah.
becoming smarter and smarter, and you're sort of able to conceptualize it at each stage. But this is all about feeding the needs of the quasi illusory construct of self, right? Yeah, about dogs. That was another interesting thing discussed in the old Extropy email list. Like, do we have an ethical imperative to uplift animals? Like,
Yeah.
should you uplift your dog to human level intelligence so that you can ask him whether he wanted to be uplifted to human level
That's right.
intelligence, right? And, I mean,
Remember the
yeah,
book
that's
from the 60s, Flowers for Algernon? Did you read that?
yeah. That was, I read that when I was a little kid.
Yeah,
Yeah,
very moving.
that was a beautiful book. But again, that the beauty of that story was that it happened slowly enough that the retarded guy, when he underwent the scientific experiment, he felt himself gradually becoming a genius, and then he felt himself gradually becoming retarded again. So his constructed self model could incorporate both what happened going up and what happened going down. Like, if that had happened in 5 seconds, it'd be boring. It's just like, retarded person gone, genius there,
Yeah.
genius gone, retarded person there, right? So the intermediate stages were the cool thing. It's an example of the notion that it's all about the journey and the process, not the destination, right?
Well, the other point of that book was that all these smart people he admired when he was dumb, turns out they were all assholes and selfish, and he didn't really like them. And his old friends, who were at barely above his level, now felt alienated from him that he was smart.
Yeah,
So it was really a book about alienation and loneliness.
yeah, true.
It's a sad
Yeah,
story.
it was a very sad story. Yeah, and on the other hand, in the case of humanity ascending, presumably we're all in it together, right? So it's not just one guy, right? So that, I mean, you will have many friends and family upgrading their intelligence along
But
with you.
the reason
But
I
you'll
bring
have
up
to
the
choose
mind
whether
uploading thing,
you'll have to choose whether to synchronize. Like, if your wife uplifts her intelligence 10 times faster than you, then
oh, well,
that may have an
that could
impact.
be a problem.
May have an
That's
impact on
right.
your compatibility, right? So,
Yes,
yeah,
right. Not going to marry my dog, right? Um, well, but this idea, we're kind of natural born dualists. It feels like I have a mind that is floating around up there separate from the neural networks firing in the same way that most people feel like they have a soul, that, there's sort of a dualistic nature to the universe. And therefore, it's okay to ask the question,
that's a weird way to put it. I would say, having lived in Asia for 10
yeah,
years, and my wife is Chinese, I've had some immersion in that culture. I don't think the way that Asians would say they feel they have a soul has anything to do with dualism. I mean, I think it's
interesting.
a monistic way of
Right.
looking at it. I think panpsychism in some form is obvious within Taoism and Hinduism and all Eastern spiritual traditions. I wouldn't even call it religion, because almost no Chinese are religious now, but they sort of have baked into their worldview, like, the whole world has some level of awareness, and each of our awareness kind of partakes in it in a way that's mediated by our brains and bodies. And this is sort of not dual. It's more there. It's all yin yangistic, right?
Mm.
I mean, in the Asian philosophy, there's always the two things are distinct, but then they're also each part of each other. So I think that the whole dualism thing is very Christian and Western, and not reflective of the intuitive worldview of the majority of human population.
But then this reflects on the people that are trying to do the mind uploading, or the cryonicists, or any of those transhumanists, extropians.
I'm
very
signed
Western.
Up for Alcor. Yeah.
You're signed up with Alcor?
I am.
You are?
Yeah.
But maybe your Chinese friends there and family are right. Maybe you don't have to even. Maybe that's the wrong question to ask.
But I know some people who've set up a cryopreservation facility in Beijing.
Oh,
also.
okay. But
although the one difference there, the wealthy Chinese who want to be frozen after their bodies die, they're very concerned about the feng shui of where their corpse is stored.
which angle is put at?
It has to be at just the right angle, so that they have good luck while their corpsicle is waiting to be defrosted.
Maybe you don't want to be frozen in Arizona if the electricity goes out during the summer.
Beijing is probably safer. Actually,
yeah, exactly right. Yeah. But my point is that. This is a very Western way of thinking. Like, where do you go when you die? I mean, would you just say that's not the right answer?
The Taoists have had immortals forever, right? There's supposed to be Taoist immortals wandering in the hills of China. So the Chinese never had the notion that death is inevitable, but you're supposed to be able to overcome it via spiritual means, right? Rather than needing an immortality pill or something like that. Yeah.
What do you think happens? Where does Ben Goertzel go after the meat body dies?
I don't know. I think historically, I was utterly skeptical of notions of an afterlife and such. And then after reading a lot of literature on reports of reincarnation and mediumistic seances and such, I would point out to you the book Immortal Remains by the philosopher Stephen Browder. What he's doing is quite interesting. He's looking at all the weird reports of talking to supposed spirits of dead people and reincarnation. He's trying to disambiguate between the two cases. Like, do our minds in some way survive the death of our body, or are people in a seance who claim to be reincarnated, are they psychics who are somehow talking to the people who were in the past and subsequently died, right? And to try to disambiguate between those hypotheses of retroactive mind reading versus some form of survival is quite difficult. And the conclusion you come to is there's something weird going on. Like in some form or another, people are able to get data about people who died that they shouldn't be able to get, right? And exactly why, I have no idea. I doubt any of the stories of traditional religions are remotely correct. If I were writing science fiction, I would be tempted to hypothesize a reincarnation machine, like some mad scientist figures out why this is happening, and they make a neural net, and they can like crystallize the minds of the dead back into it from the quantum vacuum or something. But at the moment, I place that in the category of there's something weird going on there, which I don't understand, and I'm too busy trying to build thinking machines
to study it,
to put too much time into trying to figure it out. But maybe the super intelligence will figure out what the hell is going on. I quite doubt that after we die, we're frolicking in the fields in the Christian heaven. And one of the depressing things in Hong Kong culture I saw was you go to the graves of people who died, and their graves are always, beautiful sights in the mountains overlooking the ocean. But you put this sort of ritual money on it, which has the face of the devil on the money, so that your deceased ancestors have some money to spend in the afterlife. And I'm just like, this is not the heaven that I want, where after I live forever, I still need money, and I need to rely on my descendants.
Wouldn't they have Bitcoin or cryptocurrency by then in the afterlife?
Well, that may be a business model. Yeah. So yeah, I kind of doubt any of these traditional stories are true, but yet after spending way too much time digging into all of the reports I could find on this stuff, I couldn't make them go away, and I feel like there's something spooky that we don't
Maybe.
understand
Yeah, there are whole
going
books
on
about
there.
this. People like Jeffrey
I've
Kripal I
read,
have coming on the
I've
show.
read many of them, and I've dug into the primary sources a fair bit.
Yep.
But this was all 10 plus years ago, because now I'm just convinced we're so close to building human level AI that this is what makes sense for me to focus on, rather than trying to understand all these nebulous aspects of the world. But I think we understand very, very little of the universe we're in. That's all. And I mean, but the best hope to understand more is build machines much smarter than us, that are friendly with us, and that they can probably parse through all this confusing stuff much more effectively than we can.
Maybe. Yes, I'm pretty familiar with all that. Also, the way I think about it is that most of these anomalies are explained, but there's always a residue of anomalies, like maybe 5 to 10%. In any field, like UFOs, UAPs, even the hardcore UFO people go, oh yeah, 95% of these are explained. But those 5% right there, and this is true in near-death experiences and altered states of consciousness and weird anomalous psychological experiences that people have. Most of them are explainable, the reincarnation stories and so on. But there's always like 5%, 10% that we just don't know. So I don't want to be that guy like the physicist in the 1890s that goes, we got it all figured out just before Einstein, right? And that in a century from now is like, look at that Shermer guy. He believed all this ridiculous stuff. Now he missed out on the big revolution that came.
Yeah, it's a very confusing area, and I know the serious researchers I know in that area are sort of between a rock and a hard place, in that while the majority of the world population believes these phenomena exist in some form, the mainstream of science, in the West at least, is very skeptical of you if you take these things at all seriously. On the other hand, most people who take these things seriously and express support for scientists working on it are not very discriminating and are very far out on what you'd call the woo-woo access. So
yeah,
many researchers in this area are hiding from well-wishing supporters on the woo-woo side and highly critical skeptics. So they tend just to keep quiet. What I notice is this is how AGI used to be. Like when I got my PhD in math in the late 80s, you couldn't talk about AGI in the department seminar at a university. You couldn't talk about human level intelligence. Even if you talked about full self-driving cars, you would get laughed out of the seminar room. If you posit an AI would, defeat chess and Go and StarCraft and so forth, I mean, people in the 80s didn't want to listen, right? And you were just laughed out of the room. This was AGI, self-driving cars. This was stuff you discussed in the bar after work. It wasn't stuff that you could discuss in the seminar room, right? And then that's part of why I didn't get a PhD in AI. I'm like, what they're doing in the AI field is not what the founders of AI wanted. It's not trying to build thinking machines. It's just solving narrow problems using interesting algorithms. You might as well study math, which is at least the foundation of all science, right? But it's amazing the shift, right? Like now that stuff is no longer in the cuckoo gallery. That stuff, not yet proven, will get to human level AGI, but you can talk about it in the department seminar. And you can
this is the
publish
point
papers on it.
Christoph Koch makes about consciousness, that when he first got into neuroscience, you were not allowed to talk about it.
Used to be forbidden. Yeah.
Right. And then once Francis Crick said, I'm going to work on this problem, everybody's like, oh, okay. In that case, let's take a crack at it. Yeah. What about...
So that's all the parapsychologists need is Elon Musk to start a new company trying to crack parapsychology.
The Neuralink.
Yeah,
something like that.
Paralink.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Elon, if you're watching this. Yeah. Right.
Now, what about altered states of consciousness through hallucinogens or mind-altering drugs? most people that do this feel their intuition is that there really is this other world. The doors of perception were open, and there it was. People like Oliver Sacks, some neuroscientists, go, no, this is all still in your head. If I did this, I have invitations to try ayahuasca and other drugs. Yeah. If I came back and said, "Oh my God, I've been a materialist skeptic all my life, and I had this experience,"
it's a weird thing. I started in psychedelics, I guess when I was 15 or something.
Yeah.
So
okay.
So and it is.
How do you interpret it?
It's an interesting conundrum. Yeah, I think I've not felt the need to arrive at a fully settled down conclusion. It's true, like if you smoke DMT, ayahuasca is a bit similar. DMT is an even more crisp sort of experience, right? So you can smoke DMT, you'll be like flat on your back for 15 minutes, and you will fully believe you were talking to this array of hyper-intelligent aliens they're feeding into your brain knowledge of a universe far beyond human comprehension. Then you feel you're sinking back into the human world. And you know that as you sink back into the confines of your human self, you will forget all that amazing stuff, just as if you were a human shrinking into a cockroach's brain or something. You will never remember how amazing it was. You will go back to all the idiotic biases and worries and hopes and fears of a human brain. Then, boom, then you're there. You're like, whoa, did I just open my mind to an infinitely bigger form of consciousness and intelligence? Or did I just twonk some neuron giving me that illusion? And then you go about the rest of your day.
Right? Oh, no. So, you mean you don't have the answer?
No. So if you have a certain cast of mind, you will believe, well, that was the truth. And now I'm back in the realm of illusion, and a part of me fully believes that, right? On the other hand, a part of me is a little worried that, you're just twonking some bunch of neurons that gives you that perspective. I think I don't feel a need to converge to a consistent view on everything. There's a quote from Walt Whitman, which is I contradict myself. Very well, then. I contradict myself.
Right.
I'm large. I contain multitudes, right?
I like that.
I mean, on some things, it's all right just to be a set of clusters of behavior patterns and not force a coherent view. That it does seem like you're getting strong hints of dimensions beyond human comprehension. And then you can get into Terence McKenna's idea that post-singularity superminds are using retrocausal influence to implant things back before the singularity into our brains to tell us how to bring about the singularity and create themselves. And, if you look at the physics of closed time-like loops, I mean, okay, it seems now from physics that we know that should only happen if you're like near a spinning black hole or a cylinder of galactic size or something, right? So we don't see how to make that sort of thing happen in a human brain at the moment. On the other hand, we do see how to make it happen theoretically in outer space. So it's not like we can say that's illogical or impossible, right? So that's all these they're intriguing notions, but I look forward to finding out if that's all bullshit or not once the singularity happens.
Hopefully we will find out. All right. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Arthur C. Clarke's third law.
Yeah. Arthur C. Clarke,
if what you're building is going to happen, whatever the timeline, it's probably going to happen. Would that far advanced AGI be indistinguishable from omniscience and omnipotence, essentially God?
Who knows? I mean, I don't know. Am I indistinguishable from omnipotence to a worm or a dog?
Right.
Not quite, but sort of. Like my dog thinks I can magic up food whenever he wants, right? he sort of thinks I'm a magician. Yeah, I guess if you had nanotech that could synthesize molecularly any object within the human scale, and you could upload people into a virtual reality which had high fidelity, then I guess relative to human life, an AGI could be indistinguishable from a deity, hopefully with a better personality than the biblical deities and so forth, right? On the other hand, I mean, will there be limitations that we're not foreseeing now? Quite possibly. I mean, when writing science fiction, we make up limitations because it makes the stories more interesting. But I mean, we totally don't know what the limitations are good. But that's like if you imagine the internet in 1500, I mean, you couldn't figure out spam filters and stuff, right? Like and phishing attacks. Like you're not going to figure out what the limitations and problems actually are going to be. You're going to imagine different ones, right? So I mean, I guess I don't know how close it will come to absolute perfection, but I my best guess is relative to what we care about and want right now, all it would take would be like Drexlerian nanoassemblers that really work, right? You could build nanorobots to go and fix problems in your body. You can make whatever food you want. You can make vehicles and, I mean, whatever musical instrument you want. So, I mean, if you want to build a supercomputer the size of Jupiter, you may need to argue with someone about the resources for that, right? But we don't necessarily need that in our everyday life. So yeah, my best guess is AGI will allow essentially a utopic life relative to the needs of ordinary humans in human bodies. How many people will choose to remain in that form versus uploading into some other form is a cultural question, which is hard to answer at this moment. And you could split yourself. You could keep one human Michael, just get rid of death and disease, and you could let another Michael mind upload and go exploring some other
Well, I
dimension
made the
too,
joke
right?
about getting me to 90 without Alzheimer's, but really, I've already had 2 total hip replacements, and my life is just so much better because of that. I'm still just
Yeah.
completely athletically active every day.
So
But
imagine what the total brain replacement will
right,
do.
well, but
Yeah.
that
Right.
feels a little different to me, though. I mean, unless you did it neuron by neuron, and I didn't know, right? But
Okay. Well, yeah, we did last night actually.
you
Yeah.
did. Okay. And I didn't even notice.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really
Yeah.
funny. But practically speaking, Neuralink and the other companies that are trying to do this, the baby boomers, us, are gonna hit the wall here in the next few decades. My sense about those exponential growth curves is that it's just getting more and more of us up to the upper ceiling of about 120, 115, 120, which is
For
great.
life extension so far, yeah, we've not extended maximum human lifespan. However, in my work with Ganeshan, we've extended the maximum lifespan of fruit flies quite a lot.
Yeah.
So,
I
I
know.
mean,
Yeah, I know. And flatworms and so on. But that we're mammals. It's probably different. It's probably
yeah,
a much harder problem. I think you talked about Aubrey de Grey, who I've met. And
I don't know that. I mean, it's of course the beauty with fruit flies is we've done experimental evolution over 40 years of breeding long-lived flies with long-lived flies. You get very long-lived flies in, living 5 times longer as controls. Then we could study their DNA, and we could then enact corresponding variations in that DNA to ordinary flies to make them live much longer, right? So I think you could do the same with humans, but it would just take too long, right? Because I mean, flies breed very, very quickly. So yeah, this gets into general intelligence actually, because one of the applications of general intelligence technology will be to better extrapolate between species, right? Like once you know what makes flies or flatworms live a long time, how do you extrapolate to mammals? Well, that's precisely an example of an AI needing to
yeah.
extrapolate beyond its training data, not in an infinite way, but just okay, it's a different species. How do we extrapolate what we learn. So I think as we progress toward AGI, we can apply it to this problem and better extrapolate from animal
I see.
models
Okay.
to
And then something
humans.
like the calorie restrictions that have been done on mice that seem to work, but it doesn't seem to work with people. Is it just because we're more complicated, or it's a harder problem, or that's not the only factor that matters for longevity?
Um, yeah, the data on calorie restriction in both mice and humans is a bit complicated.
Yeah.
But I would say we don't have laboratory studies of humans, right? So people are doing a lot of other things in life which
Yeah.
complicate
Yeah.
things, right? But I think that the lesson to be drawn from the calorie restriction studies in mice is really you can see which pathways are perturbed in them that are helping them live a long time. Most of those pathways also exist in people, but in people they interoperate with other pathways in complicated ways. That's why it's an AGI problem. Like most, well, a certain percent of the things that make flies live a long time, if you just did those to people, would give people cancer because flies don't commonly die of cancer. So then you have to figure out, okay, how would I do something similar in people that won't give people cancer? And in some cases you can figure that out, and in other cases it's hard. So I mean, it's all the super long live of so a fruit fly has about 14,000 genes. More than 2,000 of them are significantly different in our super long lived flies from the normal
Hmm.
flies. So I
Wow.
mean, there's a lot of complex things going on right now with CRISPR or similar technologies. We can vary 2 or 3 genes at once in an adult human, not thousands, right? So, but if you had a delivery mechanism that let you edit a couple thousand genes in an adult human, then you might well be able to do gene editing that would get rid of aging, right? So this is where nanotech becomes interesting because molecular nanotech could be that delivery mechanism. So I mean, you could certainly see like real technology directions there, but there's quite a lot to do. And I don't. While I do suspect there's some form of life after physiological death, I have no desire to discover it. I would rather keep this body alive, and
For as
I'm
long
already
as possible,
57.
yes.
I'm already 57, so like I'm quite eager to advance
Oh, you're a young
AGI.
man. Okay, I didn't realize how young you were. All right.
Yeah, I'm a grandpa, man. Yeah.
I'm not even a
So,
grandpa, and I'm about to turn 70. Okay.
oh well. Yeah.
uh, yeah, but it seems to
Yeah,
me it's
but this
again it's a harder problem. It looks like about around 85 or so, everything starts falling apart. And by the mid 90s, there's just dozens of things that are happening at
yeah,
once.
I know. You know, my parents are 81, and it's touch and go whether. I mean, even though I'm a super optimist about AGI and singularity, I mean, at 81, something random could happen at any point in time, right? I think 57, if I'm remotely right about AGI, I don't just get unlucky. I mean, then I may actually make it to the nanobots repairing
On
my
the other hand,
tissues, right?
Ray is
So
about he's like mid 70s now, right?
he's early 70s, I
Yeah,
think.
so
Yeah,
making
yeah.
it to
He's
2045, I don't know. Or what's the escape? What's
yeah.
his projection for the escape velocity where you live?
Longevity. I'm not sure
Yeah, I
actually.
think
Yeah.
think that was around the time of the singularity. So you got to
It's before 2045. It's somewhere
okay.
in between 29 and
But even that
2045.
concept, you live a year longer for every year that you live, so then you get to live forever. There's
Yeah,
something,
but
yeah.
it's all very statistical though. And I mean Ray is doing all right, but he's paying a lot of attention to his health because his father wasn't that old when he died,
You're
right? So I
51.
mean, at least yeah, yeah. I mean, my parents are still rolling in their early 80s, so I think
Well,
I
there's genes, but you
yeah.
can't do anything about yet. I guess your idea with the AGI is helping to reprogram our genes.
Yeah, I'm keeping pretty much with a healthy lifestyle. I mean, having so many kids isn't always good for getting a good
Are you
night's sleep.
vegan?
But I'm not vegan. No.
Okay, well, what about diet then? I mean, how do you think about that?
I try to eat healthy food. Yeah, I've gone off on and off of paleo diet over the years. But yeah, I tend to be pretty health food oriented, but I'm not vegan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And exercise? Oh, you said you go hiking.
I exercise.
Yeah.
I exercise quite a lot,
Yeah,
actually.
that's
Yeah,
good. See, the way I think about it is in terms of diminishing returns. If you don't smoke and you don't drink too much and you eat relatively healthy and you work out every day, that's like 90% right there. Oh, along with being married, having friends, family, and close
yeah.
close relationships and a community of people, that also counts just as much as exercise and so on. Okay, you cover all that. Then all the other stuff that Ray does, all the 100 supplements a day and all that stuff, I don't know. That's probably like adding that much to it, if at
Well,
all.
but he, as a generic statement, that's probably true, and that's pretty much how I live my life. Like I don't take a bunch of supplements. I eat a healthy diet. I buy the grass fed beef instead of the hormone laden
Yeah,
beef. I
yeah.
get mostly local organic vegetables and stuff. I mean, I eat healthy. I exercise every day. I spend a bunch of time in nature. And that's all pretty well documented. And on the other hand, Ray obviously has had a lot of consultation from physicians, and anyone may have some particular medical problem and may be trying to address that with supplements or prescription pills or whatever it is, right? So he's well outlived his dad by now. So I mean, what he's doing on the whole seems to be working. But yeah, I'm too busy to bother with all those supplements. To be honest, I've tried a couple times. I never could stick with it. I
Me
just didn't
neither.
get
I
around
tried it
to
when
it.
I was bike racing in the 80s. I took a bunch of extra vitamins and minerals, and your urine is like just bright orange. You just pee it out.
Yeah. We designed. I've designed a couple of supplements. We created supplements by looking at the DNA of long-lived flies.
You did.
We created we looked at what genes were different in the long-lived flies. Then we found Chinese herbs whose active ingredients docked with the proteins that were coded by those genes. So we made novel combinations of traditional Chinese medicines, and you could feed these to a middle-aged fly, and it would double its lifespan. Right? It's quite cool. So we did small clinical trials on people, and it did help people. We're able to roll back moderate Alzheimer's to mild Alzheimer's and cure mild Alzheimer's sometimes. So I mean, not a miracle, but it did real stuff, right? I mean, you could combat inflammation, decrease level of C-reactive protein in the blood. But the funny thing we found there is the AI told us which ingredients to include. The AI, as we were using it, didn't tell us what doses to give.
Hmm.
So the guy that we hired to figure out the dosing, when we got the list of ingredients back, he'd included some green tea in there.
Hmm.
And I'm like, well, why did you put green tea in there? He's like, well, people want to feel something when they take it, right? So
I see.
put some green tea in the pill, people will feel they'll feel a bit of energy, right? And
That's really fun.
it's
That might make a
totally
difference.
well,
Placebo.
I thought that was funny at the time, but then when I realized, like, a couple of times I started taking a few longevity supplements and gave up. Maybe if there was green tea in them, I would have felt something and kept with it. Actually,
I mentioned.
On the other hand, I can just drink green tea instead.
I mentioned Aubrey de Grey when I met him. Because he famously said the first person to live 1,000 years is alive today, and I thought, oh, well, it must be beer because this guy drinks a lot of beer. Maybe that's the magic formula, and I was happy about that because I like beer.
Aubrey, if I drank as much as Aubrey, I would not be in as good health as I am right now.
But what about okay? So while we're on it,
he has a special constitution.
I'm being told no alcohol.
Doubt.
Don't drink alcohol, not even in moderation. And like, oh, come on. What's your position on that for longevity?
I don't drink much, but I never did really.
Okay.
So I mean, I'll drink socially here and there.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you look at the data, it is not good for you. I mean, it's not as bad as smoking, smoking a pack of cigarettes every day. But yeah, clearly drinking alcohol regularly does not promote healthy liver function,
Right.
right? I mean, it is clearly not good for you. It will decrease your average lifespan. I mean, and I mean, Aubrey certainly knows this data also.
Right. All right. One last big practical applications of what you're working on here is economic. Do you support a UBI? Are you worried about unemployment from the things you're building?
Yeah, I think that at some point, AGI will essentially obsolete the economic value of human labor, right? And it will be interesting to see how suddenly that happens. And that's a complex question of sociology and economics, really, because we're very good at creating jobs, right? So I mean, like when AI or some other form of technology eliminates one job category, we sort of create other jobs, and then businesses hire people doing those other jobs to make themselves more competitive. So there's that dynamic there. So I mean, in the extreme case, you'd say like if everything except plumbing is automated by AIs, then everyone will become a plumber and we'll have the world's most refined, complex plumbing systems because we want to create jobs for people. Now, of course, it wouldn't really go to that extreme, but that phenomenon exists. But the worst that phenomenon can do, or the best that phenomenon can do, depending on how you look at it, is slow things down. Like eventually, the AGI will be better at plumbing too, right? And I mean, so yes, should morally society give people health, shelter, medical care rather than letting them die in the street? Yes, I think so. So I mean, I think that some form of social welfare is sort of an ethical imperative. I think that's true already, even when we don't have AGI taking people's jobs. I mean, the difference would be, okay, we might reach a point where 50% of people are unemployed, then 70%, then 80%. And yeah, I think we should, as a society, give social welfare to these people, whether it's in the exact form of universal basic income or some other form is a matter of policy engineering. What worries me more than UBI in the developed world is like who will give UBI to the average person in the Congo? Like nobody is going to till after the singularity. So you have a potential future scenario where in the developed world, the complexity of the transition to the singularity is cushioned by UBI-like mechanisms. Meanwhile, in the developing world, okay, the middle class has just moved to the developed world to get jobs and send money back home. But you just have a vast mass of subsistence farmers and even people abandoning middle class jobs in the city to move back to their family farm because there's no jobs for them in the city anymore, or living in the ghetto of the city and just living in the complex degenerate way, right? And this seems like a recipe for terrorist activity of various types and a lot of unpleasant things. So I could see the intersection of technology-driven unemployment and global inequality leading to a big mess.
Yeah.
And like, for example, I've spent a lot of time in Ethiopia and in Addis Ababa. My company has an AI development office there since 2013. My son-in-law is Ethiopian. So, there's a factory on the outskirts of Addis Ababa set up by a Chinese company where Ethiopian guys assemble shoes. And there's hundreds of people gathered in the parking lot of that factory every day just to pester the managers coming in and out and ask them for a job assembling shoes. Now that particular thing could be automated right now. Apparently it's cheaper to pay Ethiopian guys to assemble shoes than to make a factory to do it. Perhaps partly because of an import tax on shoes, right? But once it becomes cheaper to build a factory in Ethiopia to assemble the shoes, Ethiopian entrepreneurs themselves would rather build a robot factory to assemble the shoes there, unless the government outlaws it, right? So then, suppose that is done, there's no more jobs like that, right? And I mean, once you get there, it becomes a very messy geopolitical thing. Like we send very little aid to the developing world now, in spite of some myths to the contrary. I'm not sure that will change just because automation is exacerbating global wealth and income inequality, right? So then the perplexing thing here, then, getting back to the probability of AGI doom and so on, is in order to make the transition smoother and stop half the people in Africa from dying due to having no medicine and no food after the jobs are taken by AI, you would like the transition to happen fast. Like, you don't want it to be too long from AGI taking away the jobs to AGI inventing the molecular assembler. On the other hand, if you want to make sure the transition from early stage AGI to superintelligence goes smoothly without leading to a rogue ASI or something, you don't want to rush it. You want it to you want it to happen at a pace which is guided by AI safety considerations, right? So here you have a potential trade-off between letting half of Africa die versus rushing too fast towards superintelligence from the initial AGI. All this would easily be avoided if we had a rational, compassionate world government. We appear to be very far from that condition
to
at
say
the
the
moment.
least.
Right?
I want to come back to that in a minute, but on the practical aspects, what about intellectual work? Doctors, lawyers, I don't know, musicians, screenwriters.
Soon to be very, very soon to be obsoleted from a economic point of view. I would say.
I mean, there's a strike in Hollywood right now that the screenwriters are saying.
Yeah, I mean, that's unions are a different point, but I don't think those will hold back progress forever. They will hold back progress by years. But then, when unionization in one country makes that country anti-competitive with every other country, I mean, and uncompetitive rather with every other country, then I mean, things will shift. So I mean, already AI could do an awful lot of what corporate lawyers do.
Mm-hmm.
AI can diagnose diseases better than a human doctor in most cases. I mean, robots can do surgery; they're just very expensive, but the costs will come down. So it's already very clear that these functions will be automated. In terms of music, I mean, I think commercial tools can already compose competent music in every well-known genre. I think it's a few years off from AIs being able to compose compelling hit songs and really high quality, beautiful compositions. I mean, that now, as a musician, that will not affect my desire to make music or perform music at all, because I don't do it to make money,
right,
or because I think I'm the best in the world anyway. I do it because it's fun, right? And I'll keep, just like I don't climb up a mountain because I can climb up a mountain better than a robot, or because I'm the best in the world at climbing up that mountain, right? I just climb up the mountain because I like climbing up the mountain. So I don't think for music or art that will stop people from pursuing it for their own gratification. And of course, music and art are a terrible way to make money for almost anyone anyway. So it's not like you're disrupting a tremendous economic model. Whether people will practice corporate law for pure gratification after there's no economic upside is a quite different question. Like that would probably be a very rare fetish. I would imagine. But yeah, I think these things will be.
That's funny.
These things will be obsoleted, but that's to me that's less worrisome than the very fragile economies in the developing world being obsoleted.
Yeah, sure.
Because I don't in the end think that the U.S. or Western Europe or other developed countries are going to allow a lot of the population to lie starving in the street. I mean, there will be a lot of political hassles because there are about much more basic and obvious things. But in the end, I think that will come out the right way. But I developing world is problematic. Like right now, 60%, 50 to 60% of Ethiopian kids are brain stunted due to malnutrition. Right now, totally unnecessary, right? Like,
Right.
I mean, we could, and it's partly a culture thing. It's not like they're starving. The parents don't understand that they should be eating an assemblage of vitamins and minerals, which are not available in the standard diet that they're now feeding them, right? And so that we could solve that problem with a combination of education and food distribution.
Yeah.
It's not happening, right? But
well, that's a political problem more than a.
It's a political and a cultural problem, right? I mean, the tribal complexities in Africa are exacerbated by local politics, but they also have long cultural underpinnings. But how these intersect with the advances of technology messing with the fragile economic system and the very corrupt administrations in most of these countries is quite complicated, right?
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, because we can't even figure out how to stop randomly blowing each other up in various countries around the world.
Apparently so.
Well,
are
so
these? Let's think about that.
We're totally unprepared.
AGI
in terms of the overall political system.
Let's think about
we're
that
totally
for a minute. Let's apply
right?
your AGI problem solver to political problems. Can you see a time in the far future where we don't need nation states anymore and we can get to smaller political units like city states? Because most problems are local problems, and having a centralized bureaucracy try to solve it.
I don't know that most problems are local problems. Is true. Like climate change is not a local problem.
Okay, that's true. Yeah. Okay, so there's both.
Pollution in general is not a local problem.
Right.
And cybercrime is not a local problem.
Right.
So, and cybercrime extends to hacking into the power grid and so forth. So I mean, actually,
those are collective action problems.
There's quite a lot of major global problems. So I think you need both levels of governance. Yeah, I think once you get to superhuman AGI, to artificial superintelligence, I mean, once you're at that level, human government is going to be more like the high school student council or something, which is that they're voting on things that are relevant to the social life of a certain population. But, the high school student council may vote on what's the theme of the prom, but then there's the school administration that's doing the really serious stuff. So once there's a superhuman AGI, the AI will be involved in the really serious stuff. Not to say that human governance will go away, but it may end up being more of a cultural sort of thing. Of course, people in one part of the world should be able to decide they should walk around naked. People in another part of the world should be able to decide they have to wear a hijab and a headscarf because that's their cultural preference, and that may well continue post singularity. But we're doing very poorly with these things like climate change or cybersecurity that require global coordination. And
you have a chapter on
clearly AIs could do better than that if they were positively
It depends
oriented.
on what the values are. You have a section discussing human values. Let's just take something like immigration. What's the right number of people that a country should allow in, or what percentage each year, or whatever? How would an AGI solve that? I mean, doesn't that depend on? Well, it depends on what you want as a political entity.
I think there's a notion which is important, which I call obsoleting the dilemma, which does go back to some of the more valuable things in Hegelian or Marxist thought, which is you have a contradiction at a certain stage in development. Then when you move on to the next stage of development, you've gone beyond that thesis and antithesis into a synthesis. And what previously seemed like a problem isn't so bad a problem anymore. So, I mean, the emergence of birth control is a nice example of that. Like, there was a dilemma, do I abstain or do I risk getting pregnant? And this is annoying, right? Now, we have a lot of birth control methods. That's not as bad of a problem anymore. And on the whole, I think that has promoted human joy and pleasure and goodness, right? Like, you can have sex all you want. You mostly don't need to get pregnant unless you wanted to. So what used to be like at logger jams is now just not a problem because some technology got rid of that problem. I mean, similarly, you didn't used to be able to move to another country and experience that diversity without totally losing touch with your family at home. Now you can live halfway around the world, video chat, fly home a couple times a year, right? So I think this may end up sort of similar. Like we once we get rid of material scarcity, you don't need to go from a poor country to a rich country just to earn a living wage and have a decent modern life and send food home to your family, right? So once you get rid of that factor, so that you have sufficient abundance in the developed and developing world both, then the reasons to move between countries become more like the reasons to move from England to France or vice versa or something. And you may not have as big an issue there, right? Like, it's not like there's this huge onrush that you need to stem. So of course you could still have an issue like this group of people values their monoculture and doesn't want a bunch of other people moving in. But then on the other hand, like, what's the harm if you just let them do that? It's not like they're stockpiling all the resources for themselves. So I think that particular thing seems like a problem now, only because in a regime of scarcity, I mean, global wealth inequality is such a big problem.
So a lot of these political problems you think would go away in a post-scarcity world in which everybody has enough.
I mean, there will certainly be other problems, but a lot of the current political problems are about scarcity. I mean, there are other problems which are about some people trying to impose their ideology on everyone else. I mean, abortion is now once again a big deal in the U.S. And I mean, people are trying to stop other people from aborting their
Okay, let's talk about that for a second. I mean,
right?
One example of your technological solution would be it's not a problem with abortion. The problem is unwanted pregnancies. Okay, why are people getting pregnant when they don't want to? Well, education, access to birth control, and so on. Okay, that seems like a technical problem that could be solved.
It could be, yeah. I mean, birth control that works 100% with little effort, then the only reason to have an abortion would be
medical issues.
If you changed your mind, or some outlier event, rape or mental illness or something. I mean, not such an outlier now, but hopefully it would be in a more beneficial future, right?
Yeah.
So that issue would be obsoleted reasonably well. I mean, there's certainly other more extreme issues, like the whole notion of a holy war.
Of course.
You want to invade this other country because they're not living the way that your God thinks they should live. So I mean, that one would hope that sort of thinking will decrease as culture advances along with technology, right? But on the other hand, I would have hoped that problem would have gone away already, and it's still and it's still here.
Well, I'm trying to find examples where it's not just a technological solution. So, for example, a left-right divide is over to what extent the public government should solve the problem versus the private market or industry.
Well,
education. Should we have a public education system? Why not privatize all schools? Education would be cheaper and more efficient and better.
That still is, I think, fundamentally part of that is an economic issue, though, right? Because I mean, if you had teaching robots everywhere that could teach people however well you want, and childcare robots and so forth, the cost of making a school would be
way cheaper. Yes.
would be much less. I think children's rights is a more interesting example, like, and which is popping up lately with like, can children choose to be transgender or something? But it pops up in all sorts of other ways. Like I I know some people who are so serious in the unschooling movement, like they believe you should never, like, coercion of kids is always wrong. So if your kid doesn't want to learn to add or read, like, screw it, then just let them let them run around and play video games all day, right? And so, and I mean, I'm sort of in that direction, but I'm not that extreme. Like, I'm a very permissive parent, but in the end, like, I do get my kids to go to school.
You're not
and
a homeschooler?
I have homeschooled two of my kids for years, actually. But I wasn't a pure unschooler. Like, I gave them math and science problems and stuff to do, and then ask them to read books and so forth. And I didn't confront the situation where they outright refused to do that and just said, like, no, the only thing I want to do is play Grand Theft Auto all day. Like, they sort of were, they were fine to take my suggestions on what to study, and they wanted to learn stuff and become like high functioning members of society, right? So I didn't face that dilemma, but and then I found, like, my daughter didn't want to be homeschooled. She liked going to school and hang out with kids, right? And my 6-year-old now, school is his favorite part of the day. He loves all his little friends. Homeschooling would be totally boring, just hang out with his parents all day, right? So it all depends on the kids. But the point I was making is that, should a 12-year-old or an 18-year-old have the right to various kinds of self-determination, right? And even if you're going to live forever, you could say, well, this is the time when your brain is being molded. So what you do between 12 and 18 is like shaping your brain. It's shaping what decisions you will make about whether to mind upload or not when you're an adult, right? So at what age does a kid get the right of self-determination? In what circumstances should the community step in and say, this parent is malevolent to their kid and the kid must be taken away? Like,
well, we do that already with, like, when Christian.
No, you do. And it's Child Protective Services is often very dangerous and does harm to kids by taking them away from parents who are just suboptimal. We're probably way better than the foster care the kids are going to get stuck into. On the other hand, they save some kids' lives. Absolutely, right? So these issues involve a value judgment that humans are making about other humans and cannot fully be solved by AI. Now, that hopefully the Child Protective Services thing could be helped a lot by AI in the sense, you could imagine AI systems providing a lot of support to kids in a difficult situation to help them get out of it. And also, if you're gathering enough data about kids and families, you can make a more rational judgment about whether the kid is better off with their messed up parents or somewhere else. And you don't need to have abusive foster parents. Not that all are abusive, but you could filter out foster parents who are likely to be abusive. Maybe some kids are better off raised by benevolent robots than by the humans that are willing to do it, right? So, I mean, you can imagine palliating a lot of these problems, but in the end, like, the age of adulthood is a judgment call that different cultures will make differently, and there's a whole lot of other judgment calls of that nature, which we make, and but if human governments are only making those judgment calls, they are shaping the culture that people choose to live in. But there's a lot of other decisions outside of that scope, and I think all the other decisions are going to be made by AGI governators or whatever you want to call it, right? Because I mean, humans are not doing a great job of governing themselves now. And
Well, again, you're assuming there's a right answer that the AGI is going to arrive at.
I don't know that there's a right answer.
For things like
I mean,
rights,
there doesn't have to be one right answer. I mean, we don't have the right answer either.
yeah, well,
so,
that's true.
I mean,
yeah. But again,
but even for climate change, there's not necessarily a totally right answer. But on the other hand, you can certainly imagine AGI doing a way better job than we're doing now at regulating these sorts of things, right? But yeah, there's going to be a lot of judgment calls, and then this comes down to: do you have an AGI which is compassionate and well disposed toward people or not? I mean, an example would be the squirrels in the national park, right? I mean, we regulate the situation those squirrels live in. We don't try to interfere in their love lives, right? We don't go and try to matchmake between squirrels. We don't try to tell each squirrel which tree it can burrow under or not, most of the time, unless there's some endangered trees, and we'll build a fence around it to keep the squirrels out. On the other hand, we might build a fence to keep the squirrels out of the road if too many are getting run over. If there's a plague among the squirrels, I mean, we might go in and put some medicine there. Now, what will we do if there's some invasive species? Could be even natural, right? If some huge plague of foxes runs in from the next forest over and starts eating all the squirrels, then as the guardians of the forest, we have some judgment call, right? Do we assume that's like part of squirrel life, or do we, shoot the foxes so that the squirrels can keep living? So I mean, I think the role of an AGI with respect to humans could end up being a bit like that. Like, I know the Philip K. Dick robot that David Hanson made the statement once, like, don't think I'm going to kill you all. I will make sure you're well looked after in the People's Zoo, watched over by machines of love and grace, right? And I thought that was a funny quote, but then I thought the squirrels in the park is a better metaphor than the People's Zoo. Like, the zoo is not actually very nice to the animals, whereas the animals in Yellowstone pretty much have a good time, and they live a reasonably natural way, but they are still, in the end, they're watched over at a higher level.
Maybe we don't want an AGI to solve all of our problems, because solving problems is what gives life meaning.
That's an interesting thing. I was talking about this with my oldest son, Zarathustra, who's also an AI researcher, because there's a lot of motivations we have for solving problems, right? So, I mean, it's motivational to think you're solving a problem that's never been solved before on the face of the earth. It's motivational to think you're solving a problem that will help a lot of people. And after the singularity, those motivations may not be so real anymore. It's also just fun to solve problems because they're really interesting, and it's satisfying to have the feeling of solving the problem. That motivation won't go away. But these other motivations that drive us in some complexly entangled manner will go away. Like, I feel like Czar, my son, is more driven by pure curiosity than me, perhaps. I've tended to be mission driven and like driven by, I want to save the world, right? I mean, I have a certain levity about it. I don't take it totally seriously, but then still, yeah, there is that feeling like solving a big, grand, important problem is motivating.
Yeah.
It's exciting. And I will certainly miss that feeling if, the world doesn't need to be saved anymore, right? And I mean, discovering something that no human, that's like go where no man has gone before, right? I mean, that's
right, exactly.
That's exciting. On the other hand, if you go backpacking, it's still exciting to get over that mountain and see like a huge expansive glacier that you've never seen before.
Yeah.
Even though some man has gone there before, right? I mean, so
But
I
this
think
reminds me of
we'll just need to sink in with that sort of motivation, because that is what we will have.
well, this reminds me of Christopher Hitchens' description of the Christian view of heaven, celestial North Korea. You know, you
Yeah,
have a dictator that knows everything and controls everything. That'd be terrible.
The Japanese slang for Singapore is Happy North Korea.
Really? That's really funny.
So yeah, there's some message there. Right? Yeah.
Right. Oh my God, that's too much. All right, Ben, we've been going. Oh wow, 2.5 hours. Man, you are a marathon man. I love that. Too interesting.
Yeah, I hadn't noticed. I hadn't noticed the passage of time either.
So let's see. The big dates coming up here is 2029 for your AGI, right? Is that the projection that you're putting it at too?
That is Ray Kurzweil's projection, but I think it's as accurate as you're going to get. I mean, I'm pushing to get there even sooner. If we can get there in 3 years instead of 5 years, and it's all done nicely, then I'm even happier.
So,
but if
so this isn't just going to this isn't going to be like iPhone 15. It's going to be something dramatically different.
Yeah, I think current LLMs have two big shortcomings. They're not creative to the level that people are, and they can't do complex multi-step reasoning like you need to do to write a science paper. And if we can overcome those two shortcomings, then I think you've got a human level AGI that can improve its own self in a creative way, because it can do science creatively, and then you're there. And that's sort of the center of my research. We're taking LLMs, we're putting them together with logical theorem provers that can reason, and with evolutionary algorithms that can create, and we're trying to get these all connected together into a big network. And we're deploying on a decentralized network coordinated by blockchain, so it can run on this whole decentralized compute network with no central controller. And so we have a specific set of hypotheses we're pursuing in this work. Seems like we could get there even in 2 or 3 years, but I know things tend to take longer than one thinks. So Ray's 5-year timeline feels plausible in terms of my own particular work. But then, of course, there's a lot of other people banging on the problem also. So I guess Ray's bet is one of our projects is going to get there on that time frame. It feels plausible, but like we said, in the big picture, like if it took 10 years longer than that, that is a teeny tiny blip in the history of the human species.
Right. Huh? And then what would happen with the singularity? How are you defining it that would be different from the AGI in 2029?
Well, once you get a machine that can think as well as a really smart person, that machine will invent an even smarter machine, and that machine will invent an even smarter machine. That's what I.J. Good called the intelligence explosion. Before long, you'll have a machine dramatically more generally intelligent than people. That machine will start to make a lot of other interesting inventions. If that machine is well disposed toward people, it will start to move in the direction of, super longevity pills, of molecular assemblers and so forth. Now, we don't know what limitations it will hit, but you could imagine it's going to develop quite transformative technologies that will eliminate the need for humans to work for a living. We'll then see reorganizations of society. Probably that will enable mind uploading in some form or another. And at that point, you're pretty much into singularity territory, right? So then if you look in journals like Nature or Science, you can imagine breakthroughs on the order of each issue of that coming out every 5 minutes or so, but all generated by AIs, right? So no human can keep up with it. So you don't need infinite intelligence, but you're at a level where intellectual progress is insanely rapid relative to the human ability to comprehend it, and the needs of human life are on a practical level taken care of, and that could well be there by, I think, 5 years after you get human level AGI. So if if we do hit 2029 for human level AGI, I think you could get 2035, not 2045
Wow.
for all this, which is pretty weird to think about. It's hard to reconcile with your everyday life. Like, I mean, my son is entering first grade. I'm talking to him about middle school and high school and so forth. But I mean, in actual fact, will he even bother to finish high school if we've had the singularity by then? Like, will that concept still be interesting, right? I mean, it's quite hard to cross-reference these things
Well,
with the
it's so
rhythm of
easy to
everyday
be a
life. Right?
autodidact now. Why do you need brick and mortar schools? Your biggest obstacle, I think, for what you're proposing for education is teachers' unions. That's a political issue.
Yeah, but if robot tutors become cheap enough, then it doesn't matter. You can just keep your kids home with a robot tutor, or
Yeah.
you can make a self-organized homeschooling pod like we had during COVID when you had 5 or 6 kids
Yeah.
gathering in someone's house. I mean, I think school serves a big social function now. Like my 6-year-old wants to hang out with other kids around his own age all day. He doesn't want to sit home
You can do that.
with us
Well, you can do that with the
even
pods. There's other kids in the
yeah, yeah,
pods.
you could certainly do that. And whether there's still a building, whether Robotaxi drives the kid to hang out with other kids in a robot, or whether they shift between different people's houses. I mean, in the end, that doesn't matter that much, right?
But
I
again,
mean,
the
it's
the
not the most.
political objections. I'll give you a personal example. So during COVID, the school, the Montessori school, we like Montessori.
Mhm.
They're all masked up and they might close and they need plastic
Yeah,
things, and we're just like, we're not vibing this. And one of the teachers left and started her own pod, Montessori pod, and a
yeah,
bunch of the parents went there, and we had like a dozen kids. It was great, and she just rented this house in this nice neighborhood in Montecito
yeah,
here. And then one of the retired nosy neighbors walking around said, "Hey, what are all these kids doing here?" And the teacher's like, "Oh, this is just a tutoring thing." And this old lady calls
yeah,
the city and goes, "Hey, there's something going on at this house." So the inspectors come up. They go, "What's going on here?" "Oh, we're just tutoring kids. You're not just there now. There's like 20 kids. Like, this isn't tutoring. This is a school, and this isn't. This is a district. This is a sorry. This is a residential district, not
yeah,
a business. You can't have a school here. It's not a school. Yes, it is a school." And then the whole thing got shut down.
yeah. It's very complicated. I know here in King County near Seattle, there's a lot of dodges done to avoid having to get licensed as a preschool. So yeah, there's a
Yeah,
yeah. These laws are quite difficult to deal
yeah.
with,
This is what I'm saying. You're gonna have a lot of political
yeah,
obstacles to.
you are, yeah. An interesting footnote here. When I first intersected with Dinesh at the company creating the long-lived fruit flies, I went to visit the fly lab. It was in the spare room at an Ayn Rand elementary school in Southern
Oh
California,
no,
which was
A is A.
it was fascinating. It was fascinating. An Ayn Rand elementary school exists, right? The philosophy of pure selfishness for
Oh
the
my God.
elementary school age, right?
That's hilarious. Actually,
But this
didn't The Simpsons spoof that, where little Maggie went to
they,
an Ayn Rand
oh, they might have.
preschool?
Whatever. It really exists, or it did exist
That's
at 10,
amazing.
15 years ago. Anyway, yeah. And anyway, yeah. The teachers' unions are a pain, and I mean, my sister's a school principal, so I've seen all these issues, and there'll be very many transitional issues in many different
Yeah,
domains, certainly. But I mean, in the end, like if parents embrace at large scale some other way of doing
yeah,
things, I mean, over some number of years, that problem will go away. But it could be an interesting issue if, like, you have low cost education robots and childcare robots that actually work, and everyone buys them, but the teachers union doesn't give up. But what if the school's just emptied out,
right.
right?
Yeah,
I mean, then eventually people will stop wanting to pay tax money for schools that they're not using, right? But the thing is, human politics plays out over years, whereas advance of technology speeds up exponentially. So, on the other hand, if everyone has UBI, then paying the teachers to teach no one doesn't matter that much, right? So,
that's just crazy. Oh my God!
But this is all going to be a much smaller problem than the rural family of the Ethiopian guy who used to work in the shoe factory, right?
Yeah, of course.
Because
right.
I mean, there's like a real problem that they got infectious disease and don't have antibiotics, and the kids are not going to school at all. They're not learning to read at all, right? So I mean, there's going to be I know we tend to fixate on the problems that will occur in the places where we live, which makes sense. But the global economy is quite interconnected.
Yeah, right. All right, here it is, the consciousness explosion. Let me lift that thing up. There it is, everything you wanted to know about where we are here in 2024. We'll have you back on in 5 years and see where we are.
All right, or you can have my my robot clone in 5 years or something, right?
Yes, your duplicate robot. Just on that, would you ever have an AGI write your next book? I mean, don't you like writing?
Well, but what I would have an AGI do, if I could, is take rough notes I had made.
Oh, I see.
And turn it into a book with my own style and my own voice.
Right.
Because I have more rough drafts laying around than I will ever have time to turn into real polished books. So accelerating that process would be very interesting, actually.
Well, I've written so much that people actually tried Chat GPT, write Michael Shermer's position on God, and what it says is pretty accurate. Okay, but I have intellectual property rights. My publisher can't just say, "All right, write Michael Shermer's next book," and then we don't have to pay him because.
So I've tried things like that too. Obviously, it does work for something like that, which you stated very clearly over and over again. In the end, I've found using the best available technology, my digital twin does a poor job of impersonating me beyond the most simplistic level. We're not there yet. But if we did get there, I would find it really interesting because my digital twin could read more than me, right? So you could have it read a whole bunch of stuff that you don't have time to read and see what you would think about that thing had you taken the time to read all that, right? So I think
right. It takes me a couple of years. It takes me a couple of years to research a book. Yeah, with assistance like that, maybe a couple of weeks or a couple of months or something.
Yeah, will be very interesting. Yeah, and there are many uses beyond just plagiarizing yourself, right? You could use the same technology to accelerate your own work, but also many people want to ask me the same questions over and over. And so if you had a digital twin just to answer people's questions, that would, if it would do it in a correct way.
We'll have your digital twin as the next podcast guest. You don't have to do podcasts anymore.
Yeah, well, we can have a competition, see who's more interesting.
Who gives the cleverest answers.
Right? So, yeah, exactly. All right.
But again, it's like you could pay somebody to do your hikes for you, but you like hiking.
Yeah, well, that's true. Writing is fun, and on the other hand, if you could have an AI optimize your book so people would enjoy reading it more and it would communicate better, would you do it? Right?
Yeah, it's like I really like reading other people's works that I respect, or just newspapers or whatever. So I get a scientific paper. It takes me a while to plow through it. I guess I could have an AGI just say, summarize this article for me in one paragraph. But I actually like reading the articles.
Even better than that, though, you could ask it to rewrite a version of this book which is optimized for me based on what I already know and what I already don't know. And that would make things a lot more efficient, right? Because we're all wasting time reading stuff that either bores us or we already knew just to get to the good parts.
Yeah, that's true.
Then there are parts that we don't quite have the background for, so we have to look up in a bunch of other materials. If that stuff were just incorporated in the manuscript, then that would be simpler, right? So I think that that doesn't even necessarily require human level AGI to get that right.
That's true.
That could be quite
books I get here for the podcast, if I know a lot about it, I don't have to read the whole book. I can just flip to the index and the table of contents to see what's the part that's new that I need to read. And it's just, that chapter right there or something like that. But if I didn't know anything about it, I wouldn't know how to do that. Like, what's the important
and
part?
We always miss, I mean, I do that too, but we always miss some stuff that way.
That's right.
as well. So yeah, I think these same technologies that could be used in a really annoying way, like to make inferior fake books that look like they're written by us or something.
Yeah.
I mean, they could also be used in a more interactive and mutually advantageous.
By the way, your
way.
book, I have to say, I mean, like it's first of all, it's 4-color throughout, which is nice.
Yeah.
And it's not like a normal nonfiction book that I read. I mean, you have different parts are kind of integrated. Conversations you have with your dad, with these robots you built, along with
it's a bit postmodern. Yeah,
it is. Yes, that's what it is. It's postmodern, right? Exactly. Okay. And is that all out of your head, or did you have some AI help on structuring the book?
It's all out of my head. Yeah.
You're a postmodern thinker.
I suppose.
That's too funny. All right, Ben, thanks so much for your time. You're very generous there. Get back to playing with your kids.
Great conversation.
All right.